Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start this meeting. My name is Al Gerlone. I'm the chairman of the Mill Neck Planning Board, and I'm joined tonight by fellow board members, Mr. Daniel Bystrom, Mrs. Barbara Dooley, Mrs. Melissa Meister, and Mr. John Tobacco. Also joining us tonight are Village Council, Mr. Peter Colgrove, and Special Counsel, Mr. Anthony Gordino. Before I introduce the applicants, I'd like to take a moment to make it very clear that our objective tonight is to carefully listen to the applicant's presentation, the portion that applies to this board, afford the residents in attendance an opportunity to voice their comments and concerns, then thoroughly consider the facts of the application as well as the residents' concerns while formulating a recommendation which we will then provide to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Please understand that this board will not be approving or denying this application. Our responsibility is to make the recommendation to the Zoning Board of Appeals based on the code requirements of which the Planning Board governs and regulates. Before the Zoning Board of Appeals can render a decision, the Village Code requires that the Board of Zoning Appeals refer this matter to the Planning Board, to our board, for review and report. In rendering our decision, along with my fellow members of the Planning Board, we'll take into consideration the following code conditions. Does the proposed application provide for or contribute to the desirable improvement of the village and its protection and development in accordance with the comprehensive master plan for the development of the entire village, and whether the area and frontage of the plot or site will be adequate for the proposed use or uses. Secondly, does the design and proposed location of uses of land, buildings, structures, and open spaces of such project with respect to the provision of adequate light and air access, adequate and safe pedestrian and vehicular access and egress, the value of surrounding buildings and land, and the conservation of property values and the most appropriate use of the land. Lastly, will the project provide for a creation of a balanced and harmonious project to the harmonious relationship of the project to adjacent properties, as well as the conservation and protection of natural features. This evening, the Planning Board will be considering the application, it's a joint application of the following. Eastern Shore Towers, LLC, New York SMSA Limited Partnership, doing business as Verizon Wireless, New Singular Wireless, PCS, LLC, doing business as AT&T, T-Mobile Northeast, LLC, and Sprint Spectrum Realty, LLC, as well as the Mill Neck Manor School for the Deaf, as owner of the parcel of land located at 40 Frost Mill Road in the village, designated as Section 29, Block N, Lots 12B and 12C on the Nassau County Land and Tax Map, being located in the E1 5-acre zoning district. The joint applicant would be Mill Neck Manor School for the Deaf, the owner of the parcel of land located at 40 Frost Mill Road in the village, designated as Section 29, Block N, Lot 12B and 12C on the Nassau County Land and Tax Map, being located in the E1 5-acre zoning district of the village. Pursuant to Section 129-70 of the Village Code, the Board of Zoning Appeals has referred the applicant's and owner's application for a special permit for conditional use and waiver of relief to allow for the construction, operation, and maintenance of a proposed high wireless telecommunications services facility on the owner's property located at 40 Frost Mill Road, to the Planning Board for our review and report. I would ask that we waive the reading of the public notice.
Make a motion to the meeting minutes.
Mr. Colgrove, please confirm that all the affidavits of public notice are in order.
Yes, we have the affidavit mailing the public notice to all homeowners within 500 feet of the subject premises. We have an affidavit that the notice was posted at the Village Hall. And we have a copy of the June 10th edition of the North Shore Leader, which shows the notice of the meeting was published.
And has the village received any correspondence from Nassau County Planning Commission?
No, because that was part of the application to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and they did receive comments from, or a letter from the Board of Nassau County Planning Commission. But that's not part of this.
Not part of this, yeah. Thank you. At this time, I would ask the applicant please proceed with your presentation, keeping in mind that the record of the Board of Zoning Appeals has been shared and reviewed by this board. Therefore, there is no need to repeat your entire presentation. I would ask that you please limit your presentation to those considerations which pertain to the planning board.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hold on.
Yes, sir. You wanna-
Yeah, so I just, earlier today, my understanding is that there was a letter submitted to the planning board that requested that two of the board members recuse themselves, and I would like the two board members to comment on that request, if you could.
Oh, sure. You need to say that. I guess it's my understanding that I'm being asked to recuse myself. My husband submitted a letter, and he did it on his own without me, which I think he's able to have his own views. I'm here independently and objectively to listen to the presentation and vote accordingly on our zoning regulations.
Thanks. My husband also submitted a letter. I am able to make my own opinion. He's entitled to his own opinion, and I'm going to review everything, list everything you say today fairly.
Can't hear you.
Decision. I'm going to make my own decision based on what I hear today.
Thank you very much.
Please proceed.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Greg Alvarez from Amato Law Group, 666 Old Country Road, Garden City, New York. Here on behalf of the applicants, Eastern Shore Towers, Verizon Wireless, T-Mobile, AT&T, Sprint, or as we discussed at the BZA hearing, that may switch to Dish in light of the T-Mobile Sprint merger, and Mill Neck Manor School for the Deaf. The wireless applicants, Verizon Wireless, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint, or Dish, are public utilities under the laws of the state of New York, each holding and maintaining federal licenses through the FCC. Mill Neck Manor School for the Deaf, since 1951, has continually provided educational services to the deaf and hard of hearing children of Long Island. In furtherance of these efforts, the school and its umbrella organization strives to empower people who are deaf and hard of hearing through resources, technology, sign language, and support services, advocate for the social justice and equality of people who are deaf and hard of hearing, promote confidence and independence through specially designed educational and vocational programs, practice integrity, transparency, and responsible stewardship for the resources and assets entrusted in their care, foster respect for the worth and dignity of all individuals. So to fulfill this mission to its students, to its staff, and to its community, that is what they hope to gain from this facility, and not just the monetary benefits that we've heard from before. The facility will increase and improve communication and connectivity for all phases of their operation. So I'll try to keep it brief as directed by the chairman. We just have a couple of points that we would like to discuss that are specific to the consideration of this board. So I'll try to get through those quickly. I have two experts this evening as well. We'll also have brief remarks. So the property that we're talking about, obviously, is this property, the one we're here at tonight, 40 Cross Mill Road. It's zoned E1, as discussed, and contains the school. Just as a recap, the facility that is being proposed as part of these two applications consists of two components. The first is a 122-foot 6-inch concealment unipole with an additional 2.5-foot mounts for future local emergency services antennas at the top, meaning that it would be a total of 125 feet. I'll note at this point that we are in receipt of the memorandum in opposition and accompanying exhibits that were prepared by Mr. Campanelli's office. So we'll make a few remarks as well as we go along in regards to that, reserving some further comments that we feel, and I think the planning board has stated, may be out of, beyond the scope of this meeting for a future submission to the BZA. So I'd just like to state in terms of this height issue, Mr. Campanelli in his materials had noted the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, which does allow for some types of extensions, in this case for poles. But we would like to point out a couple of things here. First of all, we have an additional layer of approval that was part of this application as opposed to perhaps some other applications. This approval is subject to the New York State Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO. And as part of our initial approvals, before we even came in front of you, we did have to get approval from them, and they have designated the 125-foot as the designated height. But on top of that, and in response to some of the comments we have heard in the papers from Mr. Campanelli, we are proposing a stipulation to this board, a condition of approval that we offer in that we would eliminate the mount at the top of the pole, the 2.5-foot mount for the emergency services, and no longer offer what we felt were much needed fire department communications for the area. But we will still retain, AT&T will still retain and provide the FirstNet system to local first responders to provide and address the code section that requires that. But in the end, we defer to the board for their consideration as part of your report, whether or not that's something that you would like to recommend to the BZA. So we note that up front. The second component to this application has to do with where it's located. So the pole itself will be located within a compound that will also house the other associated ground equipment that will serve the carriers on the pole. Two sides of this enclosed area will be stone face wall to match a similar wall that's nearby. And then the other three sides that are facing the gym and not as exposed would be fenced with privacy slats. So that's the basic design and the two components of this application. It's going to be located between the gym building and the parking lots, just around the corner from where we're sitting today. The two applications that we talked about, I won't go through those in any further detail. We've submitted to the BZA. We had a lengthy presentation there to talk about the intricacies of what we're asking for. And here, I think we're really focused on a couple of things, and I'm going to get to those now. So on May 18th, again, we appeared before the BZA. It was referred over to this board. The chairman has stated that the criteria that we're talking about is 129-70, and so that's what we're going to focus on today. I just note initially that Mr. Campanelli's papers do discuss other things, and as I mentioned, we intend to address some of those other things, particularly need for the facility, which is certainly within the purview of the BZA. We'll talk about that in further detail in the subsequent submission. But I just point out initially, just looking through the papers on a first level, there is some troubling analysis in there, particularly in regard to the assertion that drive test data in some way has to fit within certain parameters. I know we discussed this at the last hearing. I'll just only say there that in fact the FCC has already decided to reject those. So just wanted to put that on the record to at least initially state that. So to get at the criteria that the planning board has to consider tonight, we have to get to the village code because as stated, it's the master plan and the consideration of the master plan of where to locate these types of facilities in any sort of project in the town. So we have to turn to the code because there is no formal master plan document. And the code itself speaks directly to these types of uses. High wireless telecommunications services facility. There's a whole section, 129-68J. In Mr. Campanelli's materials, he does reference a code section, but it's section 2, which is sort of the general requirements that the code has to consider, which is fine, but we have to go a little deeper. We have to look at the actual use that we're dealing with. And there are 4 things within that code section, 129-68J, that provides direction for applicants like us of where to locate reliable communications facilities, reliable communication services within the town. Within the village. So there are 4 things. First, the property should be and exceed 50 acres. Secondly, it should not be used for residential purposes. Third, there should be a protection of aesthetic qualities and open space. And fourth, there must be a consideration for looking for a solution that would provide the minimum number of facilities to accomplish the coverage that's being sought within the village. We check off all 4 boxes with this property. And when we, in our submissions to the BZA, which you have in the materials we provided, we showed how we systematically looked at the other available properties within the village that may fit within those standards. There wasn't a one that hit all of those 4 standards. It's only this property. And so when we turn back to Mr. Campanelli's papers, who says there is no commercial use within the village, no commercial properties, and that facilities should not be located next to residential, well, where else would we go but this property here? The code was designed to direct us to this property, and that's exactly what we've done. Okay, I have 2 things that I'd like to point out, and these are specific to the considerations of this board. First, I'd like to address the visual study that was done as part of this application. And then secondly, I'd like to talk about the appraisal report, the appraisal consulting report, which was prepared as part of this application as well. So first, the visuals. So that's definitely part of your consideration in your report. So VHB had submitted a planning report that was submitted as part of the BZA submission and included a visual study that looked at a 1-mile radius around this property to assess the potential visual impacts of the property. Mr. Campanelli's papers do spend some time on questioning the methodology of our visual study. We'll go into that in just a moment. I have David Wortman from VHB who's going to go through that. Just a few things I'd like to point out. First off, Mr. Campanelli cites case law that suggests that there is some hard and fast rule on how visual studies should be done. That is absolutely not the case. There's contrary case law that says you have to take a much more nuanced view of how you look at visual studies. And let's talk about what we have done to prepare this study. First off, we spoke with the village, and we said, we have scheduled a crane test at this property to go and take some photos. In response, the village provided us with locations that they knew that residents would be interested in, and so we took those photos and are incorporated into our visual study. We also took other photos, of course, because we wanted to be comprehensive and make sure that we looked through the entire 1-mile radius. We also want to note a couple of other things. First, there was some suggestion that there was some underhandedness going on with the preparation of the report. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. First of all, we were perfectly transparent with the village. We worked with them directly. Secondly, there's nothing in the code that tells us that we need to specifically notice beyond that. Further, the village did not ask us to do that. So we felt that we had done everything that we could to make sure that it was perfectly transparent. There was no requirement in the code that we had to go knock on people's doors and say, hey, wait a second, we want to take some pictures on your property, which is obviously a little more difficult in Mill Neck. There are privately accessible roads and larger properties, so that certainly is a harder proposition, and it's something that honestly we haven't done before, ever before. So to claim that we are in any way inherently defective or that we were disingenuous in how we were preparing that report is just false. So to talk a little bit more about what we did, I do have Mr. Wharton here, and I'd like him to come up and just say a few words to describe what he did. So thank you very much. I'll let him come up and be sworn in.
Can you ask those guys to get closer to a microphone? This is
Yeah, let me see.
I want you to turn on the microphone. I'll try to project.
Oh, sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Can we?
Hi there, folks. I think you can hear me.
much better.
Maybe too loud.
Okay, I think we're going to put up the slides so we can take them.
That's great. I can begin in the meantime, if that's okay with all. Good evening. My name is David Wortman. I am the Senior Environmental Manager for VHB with offices in Hauppauge, New York. VHB was retained to review the proposed facility and evaluate its potential to result in an adverse environmental impact. And as part of this effort, VHB has prepared Part 1 of a full environmental assessment form, as well as a planning, zoning, and visual impact analysis, and an acoustical or noise assessment. All of these materials have been submitted to the Board of Appeals and are available as part of the record that's been referred to this board. In addition, a letter report by VHB dated June 16th, 2021 was submitted directly to this board, which specifically addresses each of the relevant criteria that the planning board must consider in its review of the referred high wireless telecommunications facility special permit application. Those standards were mentioned earlier by the chairman and by Mr. Alvarez. I'm happy to answer questions the board may have regarding any of those materials, but I've been asked tonight to specifically review with you the relevant analyses of visual impacts that were undertaken and presented within these reports, and to elaborate a bit beyond what Mr. Alvarez introduced. Firstly, as required by the special permit criteria, the applicant has submitted a visual impact assessment containing photography, modeling of the proposed facility, and other techniques to demonstrate the potential visual impact of the proposed high wireless telecommunications facility. The full results are contained specifically within the Planning, Zoning, and Visual Impact Analysis Report dated February 2021. There were photographic simulations prepared for the applicant by APT Engineering from a total of 6 viewpoints throughout the area surrounding the proposed facility location. Because the subject property itself is so large, and because of the area's rolling topography and densely wooded character, it significantly limits the potential visibility of the facility from the surrounding areas. And so all but one of the viewpoints that were analyzed are situated within the overall school property itself. To prepare those simulations, a crane was positioned at the precise location of the proposed facility. A brightly colored flag was attached to the crane's boom arm, which was extended to provide a visual reference that would be easily identified in the field. Photographs were taken from several vantage points to document the views toward the proposed facility. And later, the crane was digitally removed from the photographs, and a 3-dimensional spatially referenced digital model of the proposed facility was then superimposed onto the photographs to provide a photorealistic view of the proposed facility. There's a detailed methodology letter by the preparers, APT, contained within Appendix B of the Planning, Zoning, and Visual Analysis Report, along with each of those photo simulations. While the crane and the visual reference was in place, VHB simultaneously undertook an extensive field investigation to document the visibility or lack thereof of the proposed facility throughout the surrounding neighborhood. The analysis was performed concurrent with the crane test for the photo simulations to provide a consistent reference point. It's important to note that the analysis was performed during leaf-off conditions, meaning winter or while there was no foliage on the trees in the area, specifically on February 5th of 2019, to represent what would be considered a worst-case scenario in terms of visibility from the surrounding area. It's also important to note that the crane was positioned at a height of 150 feet, whereas the facility is proposed at only 125 feet, such that the results can be considered to be extremely conservative in that regard. The proposed tower, as you are aware, is much lower, 25 feet lower, at only 125 feet. Now, if I could refer you to the visibility and photograph location map, which I believe will be presented on the screen in a moment. Excellent. Okay. So this map represents a summary of the results of that 1 mile visibility study. As Mr. Alvarez mentioned, we also studied a bit beyond that immediate surrounding area, and there are some specific locations identified there where the visibility of the proposed facility was also analyzed, and I'll explain that in a moment. But as part of this analysis, VHB staff traveled every publicly accessible roadway within the study area and continuously noted where the facility was either visible Partially visible, meaning that visible among some screening or other obstructions or some vegetation, or not visible at all. At regular intervals throughout the study area, photographs were obtained to document the visibility of the proposed facility or the lack thereof, as well as to document the visual character and setting of the individual roadway segments throughout the study area. The results of the field data collection were then transposed onto this map to depict where the proposed facility could be expected to be visible. As shown on the map that's here, all area roadways are identified, shown, and labeled. Areas where the proposed crane reference was visible are those areas noted in green. Areas where the crane was only partially visible or visible among substantial seasonal vegetation are noted in yellow. And all other areas, all other roadways and publicly accessible areas are left blank, denoting that there would be no visibility of the proposed facility from these locations. Now, as it is immediately apparent from a review of this map, visibility of the crane reference was extremely limited.
Clearer, you're referencing colors that aren't really visible from seated here. And what are those round?
I'll describe them.
The red dots.
I can describe what's shown on the map for you.
Thank you.
You're going to put
This,
the map.
sure. Not that
Okay, go ahead.
Most people can see that.
Right.
there's a,
My attorney copies it.
the report has been submitted to the village for some time and is available. I believe each of the board members has a copy. And we're working with the facility here to try to demonstrate it. But as I said, I will be happy to describe it.
Can we get copies of that?
At the May I continue?
Please continue. We'll
Thank you.
open it up to the audience in a few minutes. Yeah.
At the center of the map is a large red shape, which is the 86.5 acre subject property, which is the school property overall. And at the very center of that, you'll see a yellow colored star, which is the proposed facility location within the overall school property.
Can you point to that?
It's right here.
There is also a red dashed circle, which denotes a 1 mile radius from the proposed facility location. And each of the streets is labeled and shown on the map throughout the surrounding area. Excuse me, please. What I'd like to do is to describe specifically those areas where there was either visibility or partial visibility, and it'll be understood that all other areas and all other publicly accessible roadways, etc., would not be expected to have any visibility.
That's not accurate, because my
So,
house
Excuse me,
is
sir.
east
Excuse me.
across Beaver Lake, and it'll see it directly.
Excuse me, sir.
I can see the main built house, and it'll be to the right of that. And to say that there's no visibility where I am is not accurate.
Excuse me, sir. We're going to open it up very shortly. Let the gentleman finish his presentation, and then we'll listen from the audience. Please.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there are only short stretches of Feeks Lane, also known as Robert DeGraff Causeway, and Frost Mill Road in the immediate vicinity of the subject property, where there's expected to be some visibility of the proposed facility. Before I present those results in further detail, I'd just like to offer my observation from having traveled the area while the crane was in place. My observation is that, and this will be familiar to all of you in the village here, that dense mature vegetation and rolling topography are characteristic of virtually the entire study area. And as one would expect, these features easily obscure views even during leaf-off conditions. And the wooded and rolling character of the area, in my opinion, easily explains the results of our visibility study, where very limited visibility is expected. I'd like to just review each of the photographs that were taken and presented as part of this study. Each is denoted by either a red, yellow, or green dot, whereas the red dot, there is no visibility expected, the yellow dot, there's partial visibility expected, or the green dot, there is visibility expected. And you'll see there's approximately 3 green dots, 3 yellow, and the rest are red.
So you didn't go down the roads and take them where the people live? You stood at the end of the road and took the picture from there?
Excuse me, but as I described...
We have to do this in an orderly fashion. Let him finish, and I promise everybody will get an opportunity.
Thank you, and I'm happy to answer these sorts of questions, but I appreciate the chance to present. We traveled every one of the roadways throughout the study area and continuously noted whether there would be visibility or no visibility throughout. If we could cycle to the first photograph, please. Photograph number 1 is the view facing towards the proposed facility from the village-owned property where the post office and railroad station are located. This is a photograph showing that view across the soccer fields and among existing vegetation. And as you can see, the crane extended to a height of 150 feet is visible peaking just above the tree line. Next view. Photograph number 2 is taken, sorry, if you just zoom out, all right, if you don't mind. I'll just describe it as we go. Okay. So the view facing, photograph number 2, which is shown here, is the view facing southeast from in front of 28 Frost Mill Road. And as you can see, this is an area just north of the school's frontage on Frost Mill Road, where the map identifies partial visibility of the facility. And what you can also see is the densely wooded nature of this roadway segment. We've identified this as partially visible, when in fact, beyond the fence, vegetation during leaf-off conditions, etc., this would not be readily apparent to a casual observer passing by. And so we've added a red arrow to help the viewer call out and see exactly where the top of the visual reference is located in the photo. It's barely discernible, in my opinion, among the other obstructions in the area. Photograph number 3 is taken from an area where we'd identify this as a visible location. This is facing southeast from along Feeks Lane. And what you can see is, again, off in the distance is the top portion of the visual reference. And a similar photograph, number 4, is also taken from along Feeks Lane, just a small distance further east. And again, the top of the visual reference is just discernible above the tree line here, reiterating that this is at 150 feet. The next photograph, number 5. This is a view taken also from essentially the nearest portion of the Frost Mill Road corridor, and facing east. And again, here we've denoted this as being partially visible. And when you zoom in, you can see that well beyond the dense mature vegetation at the front portion of the property, and among the mature vegetation beyond, the top of the visual reference was visible at 150 feet. In leaf-on conditions, which is, for more than half the year, of course, several months of the year, we would expect that there would be no visibility. And so again, the map denotes this as a partially visible condition. Photograph number 6 is just a bit further south or southwest. And again, the visual reference is partially visible here among what I would describe as dense mature vegetation. And again, during leaf-on conditions, we would expect there would be no visibility of the facility from here.
That would be considered yellow?
This is labeled as yellow, this viewpoint. Photograph number 7 is the view facing north from Mill Hill Road at Loch Colleen. And the proposed facility would not be visible from this location. The crane reference was not visible at 150 feet, and the proposed facility at 125 feet would also not be expected to be visible. The next photograph, number 8, is the view facing northwest from adjacent to the planting fields arboretum. And again, the proposed facility would not be visible from this location. And these photographs, as you can see, represent each of these views. They're intended to be representative, and not every single photograph from every part of every roadway is shown here. But what you can see from the series of photographs throughout the area, and especially if you're familiar with the area, we show that the dense mature vegetation and rolling topography is characteristic of the area and serves to obscure views toward the facility from nearly all locations studied.
Mr. Wortman, may I interrupt?
Yes, sir, of course.
The photos really don't do justice to the actual circumstances. Many of these photos were all taken at street level.
Of course.
Many of the homes of all the residents of elevated were way up higher than street level.
I understand.
So to look at these photos and go through one by one, showing us the same thing.
They're not even the original photograph.
That's what I put right there.
We're gonna open it up shortly. Yeah, let him finish and then we'll open up. But I just want to make that point, that it's all on street level. It's really not doing it justice to these photographs.
Can we see the two green ones?
Yeah.
Again, if you want to proceed.
Sure, no
Yeah.
trouble at all, sure. And I'd like to note that the only photographs where the facility would be either visible or partially visible have already been shown. But just very quickly, photographs 9, which is from along Cleft Road, 10, which is from along West Shore Road, and 11, which is from along Oyster Bay Road at the west limit of the study area. All show similar conditions of dense vegetation and rolling topography. My understanding and familiarity with the area is that dense vegetation and rolling topography is typical of the area, even within private areas. However, our access was limited only to publicly accessible areas to complete the study, of course.
What about all the homes that are on the water and have perfect views?
Excuse me, sir, really, we can't. We
I
just
understand,
let him
but
finish,
he's
and I
not-
will let
he's
you
not
talk,
being
I
truthful.
promise. It's going to get out of hand.
Thank you.
Just relax.
Take what they want.
As I mentioned, not only did we travel every publicly accessible area within the 1 mile radius to document whether there would be any visibility, we had also visited an additional 2 locations from nearby surrounding areas. Photograph number 13 is taken from along West Harbor Drive facing southwest from within the neighboring village of Bayville. From this location, there would be no visibility of the proposed facility as the 150-foot reference was not visible, and the 125-foot lower facility would also not be expected to be visible. And very similarly, from photograph location number 14, which is from adjacent to Center Island Beach, there would also be no visibility of the proposed facility from here based on the results of the crane test.
Excuse me. Can we see the two by the bridge over there in the green?
Well, I believe we've presented all of the photographs at this point, and again, there's only,
Which one are you looking for?
The two green, right across the.
2 and 3 and 4.
There's two.
3 and 4. Can you scroll back to 3 and 4?
And what about at the end of all those little capillaries where all the homes are?
Well, that's the point I
That's where
made.
we are.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we'll be 2 floors up looking at it.
Every publicly accessible place was visited in order to determine the visibility of the dimensions. Thank you.
There is space. People are
Okay. So overall, excuse me.
Yeah, you
But,
can,
all right,
we can show the 3 and 4 while you're
Show
on.
3 and 4 one more time, please, and then wrap up your presentation.
Thank you.
And 2 is mislabeled, right? That's, you said it was north of the property here?
Where's that?
This is not 28.
Which one is this?
I'm not aware that any of
That's
this
in the
labeled.
causeway.
Well, number 28 is south of the property.
And then scroll back to 3 one more time. 3's on the side of the causeway.
Viewpoint number 2 is taken from just north of the roadway frontage along Frost Mill Road.
Yeah, we'll
That's shown on the map.
double check the address, but it is correct?
That's right.
Is that 3 right there?
That would be photograph number 3, correct. And photograph number 4 is also taken from along that same.
Yeah, the other side of the causeway.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you again, Mr. Wharton. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the comments as well. What we would ask for are any comments or concerns, considered as part of this hearing to be incorporated in reports so that we can consider it, as we return to the BZA.
Well, I think the board has a few questions.
Of course, of course.
First.
I just have one more expert that
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to present,
Please.
and then we can open it up to questions. Thank you. Okay, so the one of the other criteria that this board must consider is conservation of property values, and so we'd just like to talk a little bit about the report that we have submitted into the record from Lynch Appraisal, a consultant report, to address these considerations. We believe that its methodologies and its conclusions are well supported. We do have we do have Mr. Campanelli's papers that do question the methodology, and we understand that he has submitted some counter materials, including a few speculative letters from local real estate brokers, and then a report from Mr. Frank Ciata, local resident and real estate appraiser. Mr. Campanelli also cites in his papers some studies, which I believe we took a look. They're from New Zealand, so we're not exactly sure how they're relevant here, but they're in the papers. But we're going to talk about Mr. Ciata's report, which we think do have a number of problematic items therein. Specifically, the one I'll talk about, we have Mr. Lynch here to talk more specifically about methodological issues, but in Mr. Ciata's certification, he states a couple of things. So at the end of his report, there's it's standard in these reports where, they make statements to indicate, certain assumptions and certain background in terms of how they're coming to the report. So one of the statements in the certification says, I quote, "I have no present or prospective interest in the property that is the subject of this report, and I have no personal interest with respect to the parties involved." Okay. There's another certification as well, and it says, "I have no bias with respect to the property that is the subject of this report, or to the parties involved in this assignment." Well, Mr. Ciata was correct that he's a local resident, and we did a little checking just to make sure, and it seems like he has failed to point out that his property is actually one of the closest properties, closest to this proposed facility. So, from in our eyes, any reasonable person would find an unavoidable bias related to this application for someone who would submit that. So I point that initially just to point sort of the underpinnings of this particular report that's been submitted. But I have Mr. Lynch here who's going to talk a little bit more about methodology. So I'd just like him to come up to make a few comments in terms of what stated in Mr. Ciata's report in relation to Mr. Lynch's report and in relation to Mr. Ciata's report. And then I'll conclude and then we can open it up. So Mr. Lynch, if you could step forward and state your name for the record.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. It's Michael Lynch, 15 Dewey Street, Huntington, New York. I'm here as state certified real estate appraiser on this matter. Sorry about that. I can't raise this.
That's better.
Okay. Good evening again. It's Michael Lynch. I'm here as the real estate expert on this application. I did testify before the BZA last month, as well as prepare a report with my findings. As Mr. Alvarez pointed out, there were some points that I'd like to go over with respect to Mr. Campanelli's memorandum in opposition, with respect to to real estate values, as well as Mr. Frank Ciata's report, which was an appraisal review of my consulting report that was submitted as supplemental to my expert testimony last month. So that report that I prepared concluded that the construction of the proposed wireless stealth unipole would not have any deleterious effect to nearby property values based upon the condition, as well as studies that I've carried out across Nassau and Suffolk counties, as well as the town of Oyster Bay and the various hamlets. With respect to Mr. Campanelli and his memorandum in opposition, on my testimony in my report, on page 16, he notes that I did not consider in any of the studies that I carried out the various factors that influence values with respect to sales, specifically age, condition, upgrades, amenities, etc. of each sale that I used in each of the samples in the before and after. Well, for a good majority of the case studies that I prepared, the same house sold both before and after, so therefore the specifics with respect to age, condition, upgrades, amenities were largely the same, if not identical, in both the before and after situation of those studies. The other studies where I did more of a sampling of a neighborhood both before and after the installation of a wireless site, I chose sales that were, again, largely similar both in the before and after situation. But the most important point that Mr. Campanelli cites incorrectly is that I did not consider in each of my studies the ambient or overall market as compared to my studies for a specific hamlet, which is completely untrue. In each of those 7 studies that I outlined in my report, I specifically note the ambient or overall market conditions with respect to each hamlet or zip code and time frame, again, with each of the data points. Moving on to the appraisal review report that was prepared by Mr. Ciata, he acknowledges at the beginning of his report that he did not inspect the property. It is an appraisal review of my consulting report. He acknowledged from the get-go that he did not inspect the property or the proposed site locations, that it's adjacent to wooded lands, the Long Island Railroad, right-of-way, etc. Or did he perform an independent research or verification of the data that I utilized in my consulting reports and my studies? I'll be brief, just 2 of the studies that he pointed out. He went on to note the Southwoods Road tower that I studied on Woodbury Road, which is a 300-foot tower adjacent to a newer housing development. He states that he did his own independent study of that tower, and he found 2 sales on Chauncey Place, recent sales that sold for $1.4 million and $1.592 million that were not within view of the tower. He then found 2 other sales at 2 Shannon Drive and 10 Shannon Drive that are within clear view of the tower, and those sold for $1.3 million and $1.285 million. He concludes that based on these 4 pieces of data, that the presence of the 300-foot tower caused an 18% depreciation of the home values. What he failed to include in that study was another recent sale at 9 Shannon Drive at $1.65 million that's within clear view of the tower. But including this sale would have completely nullified his study. And then with respect to the second study that he did his own independent research on, the links at North Hills which is adjacent to the 150-foot tree pole on Shelter Rock Road on the North Hills Village Hall. He didn't like my selection of the housing development to the south in Searingtown. Instead, he did his own study of the condominium development at the links, and he found three recent sales, rather, of condos on Baltusrol Circle that were not within view of the 150-foot tree pole. They sold for $1,340,000 to $1,502,000. Then he found two other sales on Firestone Circle that sold for $1,160,000 and $1,225,000. Those are within view of that tower. And again, that's a gated community, so I'm not sure how he got into that particular development. But he stated, based on these 5 pieces of data, that the 150-foot tree pole depreciated the condos by 24%. Now, as with the Woodbury study, he failed to include a key sale, recent sale, which is at 143 Firestone Circle, that sold recently for just under $1,500,000. And this actually abuts the Village Hall property that houses the 150-foot tree pole. So including this sale, again, would have nullified his study. And he goes on to critique some of my other studies, stating that they're either too old or not relevant. He talks about a study that I did on the easterly portion of Riverhead in North Fork of a newer housing development called the Highlands that abuts a golf course. He stated that the housing stock is more basic housing, implying again that buyers in there would be less sensitive to the presence of a 130-foot stealth pole, which sits on the golf course. Keep in mind that this newer development has home prices upwards of $800,000, and golf course views are one of the selling points of those homes. And if there was a perceived negative influence with respect to the stealth pole that sits on that golf course, it would have shown in my data. So that concludes just my rebuttal, again, of the submissions by Mr. Campanelli and the appraisal review report that was submitted.
Excuse me, Mr. Lynch, one
Yes.
question. How long after the cell towers were installed were these homes analyzed? Was it recently, right after the installation, or was it?
No, you would need a period of time to study,
Yeah, what
because the
was that time
sampling, typically 5 years or so subsequent, and then 5 years or so prior.
So the properties that you're analyzing, do you have the dates when the cell towers were installed?
Yes.
How long after? Was it 5 years plus?
It varied, yeah.
Market condition
Thank you.
changes.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I know the community and board has questions, so we'll defer at this point that will conclude our presentation for the moment.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions.
Of course.
For the board first, before we open it up.
Of course.
A couple of the concerns that I have, obviously, is the visibility aspect and the potential noise factors.
Okay.
I mean, your presentation was fine. You tried to calm everybody down, but there are 3 generators, if I'm not mistaken, going on this property.
Yes, we did perform a noise study, and that was also Mr. Wharton's office. He can speak to that effect.
No, I saw the study. No, there were 3 generators. How often will those generators exercise?
Yeah, I'm going to need Mr. Wharton to answer those specific questions.
Mr. Wharton can come back. You don't want to know how noisy it's going to be? I mean, that's fine. We'll try. I'm trying.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfect.
Yeah.
Use up our time, that's what they're gonna do.
You'll have plenty of time.
No.
Yeah, sure.
That's the whole point, is to use up all the time so nobody can ask questions or get answers.
Good evening.
Mr. Ward, can you please address my question about the exercising of the generators? Is it going to be weekly? Is it going to run for an hour each day? Because maybe the residents don't realize it, but I've installed a lot of generators, and they exercise a lot, and they are noisy. 1 generator. 3 generators? If it's not a concern to the audience, that's fine, but it's a concern to me as a resident also.
So what's his answer? How many hours a day?
Yeah, let the gentleman, please.
My understanding is that for a routine maintenance, each generator would be run for a brief period, approximately once per month.
I do have another witness here who could answer that question with a little bit more detail. So I'd like to introduce Vicki Brennan. Yes, of course. She will. Just introduce yourself for the record and answer the question. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Victoria Brennan. I'm here on behalf of Eastern Shore Towers. The generators will cycle one time for an hour, once a month, and if you so choose, we can sync that time so they all exercise at the same time. The generators otherwise will not turn on unless there's an event of an emergency, which would then power the cell site so everyone could have cell phone coverage during an emergency.
Can these generators be sunk into a wall and recessed to muffle the sounds and minimize the sounds?
So generator technology has come a long way, and right now one of the key things is we house them in a level 2 sound enclosure, and that deafens the noise. And I think you'll find in the noise study prepared by VHB, it was just higher than ambient noise, occurring during the day.
Yeah, how far is the tower?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, at this time, we have nothing further and would open it up to any questions or comments.
Just a second. Let me finish with the board questions, and then you guys can all ask whatever you'd like. Dan, do you have any questions?
I just wish we could have been at the February 2019 crane. Oh, look at this. I was saying that I was wishing we could have been at the February 2019 crane test, given that we have to vote and take into consideration the visibility of this tower, because I do find the photographs very hard to read. So that's a concern of mine, and I do kind of wonder why we weren't included in that. I also think that those images are taken at low elevations, and taking them from the street, we have a lot of vegetation screening our homes and our residences. So I have 7 acres, it's pretty clear. So I don't know, I don't see any of your images. They all look at trees from a street level and low elevation. So I find that difficult. My other question is a little different. It goes to the appraiser. And I know when I look at house appraisals and things, it's not just an address and a price. There's a lot of different reasons, maybe lot size, improvements, beds, bathrooms, numbers of those. So I don't really have a good idea on the appraisals. They're just sort of numbers to me. I guess that would be my considerations or my questions right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
A couple questions about the methodology with using the crane to produce the photographs.
Sure.
Can you describe the color of the crane as it would compare to the tower, as well as the circumference and size of the tower versus the crane itself?
Sure, yeah, the crane is installed just to provide a height number, so it's not, the exact of what the pole will be, it is the exact in terms of the height. Here it's a little bit different because we started at 150 and now we're actually at 125. So again, that's why the pictures are at 150. But it's really just to denote the height. There are simulations within the report that show the color. It's meant to be a light gray.
But the circumference, is the circumference accurate?
Is it consistent with the crane?
No, the circumference is, is going to be subject to the design of the pole, and I believe, let's see, do we have our expert here? We do have our architect here who can quote me the exact. He's looking it up, but yeah. So again, it's meant to provide it in. If you look at the simulations, you can see you can get a flavor for what the pole will look like.
I got a question.
Sure.
Barbara, any other questions?
No, that was my
The same question.
You'll get a chance, I promise.
You're gonna bypass.
No, I won't bypass. John, any questions?
Just a general RF question. T-Mobile has 600 megahertz spectrum that they use. in the future, if this technology gets better, would it require the same height?
Generally, yes. There's not a great variation in terms of, the available bandwidth at this point. So the height would be considered, would be comparable. But, we did present all of our testimony to the BZA and, had not provided our experts for this evening since we thought the purview was more related to visual.
As I noticed, the test was done at 700 megahertz. I was curious at 600 if it would require.
Yeah, it would
lower
no, it would not materially change.
And is there any possibility at all in the future that the FAA is going to require lighting on this tower?
We already went to the FAA and they did not require it.
Today.
At the 125 feet?
Correct.
Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Oh, Barbara, sorry.
So you said you're going to take off that 2.5 foot.
Well, it was suggested as a condition of approval to allay the concerns about it ever going higher.
Mhm. So at 125 feet, that's definitely, if it was approved at that, would it remain at that height, or do you have?
We would
the
commit to a
ability-
condition of approval to keep it at 125,
You
yes. Or 122.6 at this point.
And could there ever be any type of like weird wires or structures on top of that pole?
Well, no, because it would only be designed for concealment at that point. So there would be no external, and that's the purpose of this design, to keep everything inside and keep it more, more of a sleek.
And the diameter of that pole is about 4 feet?
Approximately 42 inches, yes.
Okay, if there are no other questions from the board, I'll invite the audience to share your questions and comments briefly, if you can. I'm sorry?
The gentleman seems to be ready. I'm an attorney representing
You're
62
an
Act.
attorney
I'd like to go up if I
representing
may
both?
ask.
So I'll just ask that you be as brief as possible with all your questions and
I have no
try not to repeat the same questions that we've all asked on.
I have no questions, I have a presentation.
Okay.
If it pleases the board, I'd like to make it at this time. I did not have a first hearing where I was able to present evidence.
Okay.
I'd like that opportunity now on behalf of the 62 homeowners that I represent.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
State your name and title.
I will.
We're gonna hold on that for a minute. Let him make his presentation. He's representing most of the residents. Let him speak, and then we'll pose that question.
It feels kind of weird looking at you from the side.
It is weird.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank you, I appreciate it. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Andrew J. Campanelli, Campanelli Associates PC, 1757 Merrick Avenue, Suite 204. Good evening. I, as I mentioned earlier, represent 62 homeowners, the vast majority of which are from the village of Millneck. There are some from Locust Valley. I've given a full list of all of the homeowners I represent to your stenographer because I didn't want to make her type down 62 names today. So I'd like to address the application. I haven't had the privilege of appearing before this board before, and you don't know me. So I am an attorney. I've been practicing law for 28 years. I've been handling cell tower cases for 25 years and federal litigation under the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Not just across the state of New York, but across the entire United States. I like to think I know more about cell tower law and the Federal Telecommunications Act pretty much than anybody else. It always surprises me, or I should say never ceases to amaze me, when I see applications of the type that I see here.
Excuse me, Counselor, could you just speak a little slower?
Thank you. In representing my clients, really there are two goals for me. The first goal before this board is to persuade this board to recommend that the application be denied. Not only because the application doesn't meet the requirements of your smart planning provisions in your code, but also if this applicant, this site developer, is permitted to build this tower that they want to build, and I don't think there's any way it's ever going to be 120 feet, and I'll explain why later. This will inflict upon the nearby property owners the precise types of adverse impacts Chapter 196 of your code was adopted to prevent in the first place. Of equal import, it is important to me that if I persuade you to recommend that the application be denied, it is important to me that the village deny the application in a manner which complies with the requirements of the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996. Because if it does, it will, to the greatest extent possible, render your decision immune from challenge under the Federal Telecommunications Act. As I said, I handle federal litigation under the TCA across the entire United States. I'm admitted to federal courts in 23 states. The first thing I'd like to address is the visual impact analysis, which has been submitted by this applicant and the testimony of its expert. Like any smart board with a smart zoning code, local governments, and I've been before, I've handled cases in Plain Dome Manor, Lake Success, Flower Hill, all over. The whole reason that a village adopts a code provision that requires the applicant who wants to build a cell tower to provide a visual impact analysis is to give the local board an accurate depiction of the actual adverse aesthetic impact the cell tower is going to inflict upon the nearby homes. What has amazed me for 25 years is that site developers constantly prepare visual impact analysis where they deliberately omit from the analysis any images taken from the perspective of the nearby homes.
Well, we made that clear.
Okay.
Yeah, we touched on it.
You didn't.
No, we didn't.
Right,
Yeah, we did.
They mentioned the case I cited, which was OmniPoint. This problem got so bad that in 2005, it made its way up to the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. And as your learned counsel can tell you, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit is the highest federal court in New York. The only court above it is the United States Supreme Court. And in 2005, a court rendered a decision where it said the local government can reject as defective the visual impact analysis that applicant submitted because none of the photographs were taken from the residents' properties, much less their second-story windows. Why did the court say that? Because the court recognized not only the difference in taking photos from public roads and taking it from their property, but also the problems with elevation. This village has differing elevations. Their visual impact analysis is utterly useless, and quite frankly, they know it. OmniPoint came down 16 years ago, and for 16 years, I've watched Verizon applications from New York to California to Florida, and they always deliberately omit photographs taken from the closest homes. It's not an accident. And then they come up and say, oh wait, we came to the village. We asked you to tell us where you want us to take photographs. It's not up to you. They know where they're supposed to take the photographs. They choose not to do it. I respectfully submit that their visual impact analysis, quite frankly, isn't worth the paper it's written on. It certainly doesn't meet the criteria of your code, and a recommendation should be made that the application be denied based upon that alone.
You're here.
Now, with respect to the real estate appraisal from Lane, I was interested to hear what Mr. Lane had to say. I've seen many of his appraisals. Many.
Mr. Lynch.
Mr. Lynch, excuse me. I think I actually saw one where he said cell towers raise the value of nearby homes. And I'm pretty sure I had one of those fairly recently. I'm going to ask, if possible, to keep the record open for 2 weeks because I want to provide evidence to challenge his credibility. Now, when I say that, it's important to understand as a board how federal law applies to your job. They may submit evidence, and they can come in and say, we have a gap in service, and this is the least intrusive means of remedying that gap, and so you have to grant our application under the TCA. That's false. First of all, it's important to me that I make it clear to you that you have to make certain factual determinations. Two types. You have to make factual determinations under your local code, which is easy, but then you must also make determinations under the Telecommunications Act because of the claims they made. The good news is you and you alone get to make those factual determinations. You and you alone get to determine what evidence you can require the applicant to produce, and best of all, you get to determine the weight of the evidence. So you can look at their visual impact analysis, and you can look at the evidence submitted by your homeowners and choose which carries more weight. And I want to address that very briefly. As you know, next to my submission, I've submitted a plethora of letters from the nearby residents who give you an exact expression of what adverse impact they will suffer. Now, it is important for me to note, the federal judges in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in Omnipoint basically said, the persons in the best position to know and understand both the nature and the extent of the adverse aesthetic impacts are the homeowners themselves. And I say that because this. One of the other requirements of the Telecommunications Act is that any denial that you make, for whatever reason, has to be based upon substantial evidence. According to federal judges, the letters from the homeowners constitute substantial evidence. I want to read just 5 lines. And again, I don't want to belabor a point, but I'm creating a record. And anybody who's anybody will know exactly why I'm doing that. The first letter I submitted to the board as Exhibit A annexed to my brief is from Gabe and Chrissy Holm. And in the letter, I'm going to read one sentence. To be frank, we would not have fallen in love with this location and built a brand new home here if we would be looking directly at a cell tower. The construction of the tower will directly impact the views of the rooms stated above. Letter from Nicholas Jones. When we make breakfast, lunch, and dinner, there will be the cell tower dominating the view. When we are gathered at the kitchen table, there will be the cell tower. We would have family and friends to pool parties or cocktail parties. There will be the cell tower. Geoffrey Kelter, 155 Factory Pond Road. It will be very visible from all of our views from our house. This applicant didn't submit one image taken from any of these homes. Ask yourself, why not? According to a federal judge, this constitutes substantial evidence of the actual adverse impact these homeowners will sustain. I'm not going to read them all. Please take the time and read these letters. These are your constituents. These are your property owners.
Thank you very much. Everything is being taken into consideration.
Thank you.
At this point, we'll open it up in an orderly
No,
manner.
excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is Frank Biondi. I've sat here for a 3.5 hour zoning meeting, an hour more from the cell tower company, and I would like my attorney to finish his presentation.
I thought he was.
Yeah, I
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The lack of credibility in the visual impact analysis is emblematic of their entire application. Speaking quite candidly, I don't believe there's any way, shape, or form that this tower will ever be limited to 120 feet. It's not possible. The reason they want it to be taller than 120 is the very same reason they filed the initial application for 148. That's what it's ultimately going to be. And here are some of the reasons why. First of all, I knew it could never be 125 with the fire departments. And by the way, if you look in your file, there's a letter from the attorneys that say the fire departments are co-applicants. I'd like to know if they've withdrawn the application for the fire departments, and I have that letter if you need to see it. Mr. Amato's firm submitted a letter explaining to this village that the fire departments are co-applicants. Now, in the depiction of the lower tower at 125, it does not have the antennas that the fire departments would want. And the last time I was here, Mr. Amato said this was an all-inclusive application. They were going to put these fire department antennas on there. That was it. Now, the fire department antennas make their depiction impossible. It is impossible for them to do what they're saying they're going to do for 2 reasons. The fire departments use a different type of equipment. They use something called whip antennas. Typically, right now, they use 6- and 8-foot whip antennas. These antennas are 1.5 inches in diameter, and unlike the carrier's antennas, they're fed by coaxial cables. Now, I sat here and I listened to Mr. Amato say that they were going to make room for at least 2 fire departments and the Nassau County Fire Marshal's office. If, in fact, they were to put them up there, it creates 2 problems which make what they're telling you is going to happen physically impossible. Whip antennas must be distanced. They must separate them either vertically or horizontally. This is why in the original depiction, at the top of the tower, they showed a cantilever. That's the most common way they get installed. So what would happen is, even if they stayed at 120, which is never going to happen, These 6 or 8 foot whip antennas would have to go on top, but they're not going to be together. They have to be separated. So they'll build a structure out and raise them up. How many can you raise up? 3 fire departments would need 3 whips. There's no room for that. So realistically, the tower is going to be 148 to 158, 14 to 15 stories tall in the heart of a residential neighborhood. The other problem is this. They're telling you this is a slim, all-inclusive tower. The materials of which this type of structure is constructed, the external material, is an RF translucent material which has no structural integrity. It cannot support any type of antennas. So the whips cannot be mounted below the 120. They have to go above the 120. But the tower can't be 42 inches thick if they're putting three fire departments on there. Because to do that, they'd have to put 12 coaxial cables inside the tower, and this design is physically incapable of holding it. So the tower would have to be fat. But even at this base width, they're putting a 42-inch base. That's designed to carry a 150-foot tower. Their engineer admitted that last time. That's why I asked him for that. Now, why do I think it's going to be taller than 120? I've handled hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases. And I've sat here and I've listened to AT&T and Verizon and Sprint say the same thing every time. They go and they try to put up a 140, a 160, or a 170-foot tower, and the board asks, why does it have to be this high? And they say, our antennas have to be above the tree line. Now they're telling you that 4 carriers with all these antennas, and the base is going to be 67, which is below the tree line. That is inconsistent with what they told me is possible in hundreds of cases across the country. It's not going to be 120. Now, if you approve 120, what can they do? It's easy, they do it all the time. They simply build higher. They simply extend 20 feet and claim that they're exempt from your review. They might either file an application if they want to be courteous, but they'll extend the height of the tower and say, sue us, you're preempted. There was something else that bothered me tonight. I heard a representation by the applicant's attorney saying, oh, this is my favorite, we'll consent to a condition. Well, we'll limit it to 120. I can tell you, in case after case, where a carrier has made an agreement to not go taller or not increase power output, they never honor the agreement. Sprint is one of your applicants. Sprint entered an agreement to put a cell tower on top of a school district. And this is a case, I didn't expect this, I would have the citation for you. The school district was smart enough to say, you know what, we'll let you put on the school, but we're going to limit the RF radiation level. You have to agree that the tower will not expose the general public to radiation levels that go above this. And Sprint said, no problem, we'll do that. And they signed a written lease. 6 months later, Sprint said, sorry, we can't do that. We have to increase the power output. The school district said, no, you got a signed contract. They said the contract is preempted by federal law. Sprint took it all the way up to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals and sued them to try to get out of the contract. And the only reason the contract was upheld is because the federal court said in that case, the school district was acting in a proprietary capacity, not a regulatory capacity. So they couldn't be preempted. They were just another landlord. So the limitation on power output was enforceable. But if you agree and say, oh, we'll stipulate only 120 feet, you're acting in a regulatory capacity. If they want to go up 20 feet so this site developer can get more money from another carrier, all they have to do is say, preempted. The Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012 allows us to put up another 20 feet and you can't stop us. Now, I'm going to try to go through this fast because I know the residents want to be heard, but I have to touch on some really important issues. Coverage. I'm not here to tell you that there's perfect wireless coverage in Mill Neck. I'm not claiming that. But what I am telling you is, this applicant has failed to give you the information you need to make an informed decision about this tower. Okay? The goal of your zoning laws is not to stop all cell towers. People love their iPhone, they love their iPad. That's fine. So local governments, like yours, adopt smart planning provisions. These are zoning code laws basically designed to achieve 3 objectives. Number 1, enable the carriers to provide coverage. At the same time, it's in your code, minimize the number of towers they need to provide that coverage. And number 3, avoid to the greatest extent possible unnecessary adverse impacts on homes and residential communities. Okay? You've got that in your code. The only way you can do that is by requiring this applicant to provide you hard data, not the gibberish they've given you, because it's gibberish. They have to provide you hard data. If there's a significant gap in service, let them provide to you the drop call data. Let them show you the failure of service records that they have in their computer files and they can print out with a few keystrokes. Why? If they give you the hard data, it will show you exactly where the gaps are and the geographic boundaries. And then, and only then, would you be able to ascertain if granting this application would be consistent with your comprehensive plan. Because if there are gaps, and this doesn't cover it, this site developer may be back in 6 months telling you have to let her put up another tower. So you have to get the data. Now, you heard the other attorney say, you know, Mr. Campanelli referenced the FCC. I did. Last August, the FCC and the California Public Utilities Commission simultaneously came up with the same determination. They said, we're not taking these guys' propagation maps anymore. They had a different problem. They were giving out federal funding based upon coverage. And so the more coverage the carriers had, the more federal money they got. And they came to the conclusion that they were falsifying their records to show more coverage than actually existed. Local governments find the opposite. They find that when they send out propagation maps, they exaggerate the gaps in coverage. So they can show and justify that they want to put it exactly where they want to put it. You have the power to say, I want the actual data. It's more important than ever because of what they've submitted to you. If you look at the submissions from these engineers, okay, and I respectfully submit, the village would be very wise to hire an RF engineer. I'm not an RF engineer, but you'd be very wise to do so because they might ask, for example, why is it, according to their engineering studies, that Verizon is saying they need an RF signal strength 32 times higher than AT&T? Why? They say they need 80 dBs to provide cell service in Millneck, when the other carrier can do it with a cell strength 32 times weaker? Is their equipment that much more defective? It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And again, I look at this stuff all day long. And when I look at this, I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Ask them to produce their denial of service records. That will show you exactly what the problem is, if there is. Now,
Mr. Campanelli,
yes.
with all due respect, this board has no jurisdiction over what you're explaining right now. It has nothing to do with us. The zoning board of appeals, by all means.
But you have
and
to
I
make
understand you want to make the audience educated and bring them up to date with stuff, but we're not deciding on that.
Number one, you have to make the recommendation. Number two, under your code, only you can hire the RF engineer. The zoning board of appeals can't.
Understood. But
That's why this is important.
okay. I'll let you proceed, of course.
Okay.
But please, just try to be brief, because I know everybody wants to
Okay.
have a statement.
All right.
And I don't want to...
Al, excuse me,
Yeah.
Al, maybe I'm just naive. Could you, I don't understand, what is your board versus the planning board? Like, what is the hierarchy here? Like,
Our board has to, like I mentioned earlier in the opening, we're more concerned about the harmony between the project or the applicant and the surrounding properties. Not so much as the coverage of the cell service or the drop calls. We're more concerned about you guys and saying it's going to affect our residents in this way. Property values, vision, noise. Not that one carrier is falsifying records about coverage drops. And I believe you, but I'm just...
Here's my problem with that. One of the constraints that the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996 imposes upon the village is that you cannot prohibit or effectively prohibit the provision of personal wireless services. This is where most villages get sued. How can they prove that a denial of their application would effectively prohibit them from providing personal wireless services? They have to prove two things, and the village has to determine whether or not they prove them. Number one, they have to prove that they have a significant gap in personal wireless services, and number two, that their proposed installation, exactly where they want it, at the exact height they want it, is the least intrusive means of remedying that gap. Biggest problem, the most common reason I end up in court with local governments protecting them is because they failed to make those determinations. To make those determinations, this board and only this board can hire an RF engineer. Now, as far as evidence to show there are no significant gaps, I provided 3 very important documents. See, each of these carriers maintains a database which shows exactly where they have coverage and exactly where they don't have coverage. And the database is accessible online. You can go online and look up their coverage maps. And so I provided to you their coverage maps for this specific location. And according to all three of these carriers, they have no significant gaps in service at the precise location where they want to build the tower. Now, I'm not saying service is perfect. I'm saying no significant gaps. There's a difference. Federal law doesn't require you to allow them to have perfect coverage. Federal law says if they have significant gaps, and the only way to fix it is by putting a 140-foot tower here, then you have to let them do it. But you can get an RF engineer to ascertain for your result whether or not they've shown it. And I'm pretty certain if you get an RF engineer, he's going to come up with a conclusion that they don't have it. They can't prove it. And thus, they can't force you to grant their application. I'm sorry.
Okay, I would like to ask you a question. What is the basis for you saying that only this board could hire the RF engineer? This board's not making any decision.
I
at all,
understand.
is it? It's just a recommendation.
If I recall, when I looked at their code, I forget where I saw it, but when I was first retained, I looked.
Okay.
It's fairly clear in your code, this board has the power to hire.
Yeah, this board is strictly advisory at this point, right?
Yes.
It's just as a special permit, and that's the chairman's comment.
Yep.
Is that, I know you're getting into things that are relevant to the zoning board decision, because
Yep.
that's where a decision needs to be made.
Yep.
But the only job that this planning board has is to evaluate the special permit criteria for both the school and for the telecommunications facility.
Right.
And that's limited, and that does not involve RF. So that was the chairman's point. So if we can keep
Well,
that.
if you look at the criteria in the chapter 196 subdivision J, and I can pull it for you, they also have to consider minimizing the number of facilities you need to provide wireless services. And to enable the board to figure out that making a positive recommendation would be consistent with that objective, I'm pretty sure you can hire an RF engineer.
No, but those criteria, the criteria that you're referring to are zoning board criteria.
Yes.
That's not what this board's criteria are limited to just the 4 items that the chairman read at the beginning. That, impact, visual impact, noise impact, impact on property values. That's the only function of this board. So I know you're giving us a lot of information.
And being consistent with the comprehensive plan as
And
well.
a comprehensive plan. That's
Which
not
is
an
to minimize
RF question.
towers.
No, I'm not.
I get it.
That's all I'm saying.
Thank
That's
you.
why the
Thank you.
chairman was saying if it could just be
All right.
focused.
I have other things to address, but I'm going to give my time to, out of respect to the board and the residents, I'll sit. But thank you for your time. I
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
it.
I appreciate it.
That was great.
Thank you.
That was great. I'm Dr. Geoffrey Broderick. I lived in the Mill Neck area, Mill Neck, Lavingtown, low-cost valley for the last 40 years, okay? And I'm a veterinary surgeon, a veterinary doctor, a nutritionist,
Oh, yes.
and I served my country as a paratrooper in Korea. When I moved to Mill Neck, it was a little different than Korea. And the beauty of this place, the beauty of Mill Neck Creek, the beauty of where these guys live on, that can see the tower. I'm not talking about the size of the tower or the strength of the tower or the bigness of the tower, because this guy, this great lawyer that the people of Mill Neck hired to represent them are saying they don't want the tower. And one of the reasons they don't want the tower is because the tower is going to run for 20 minutes every quarter of the year or something, so that we get better reception so the fire department gets a better reception. There's got to be a tower here. And that tower, as the gentleman at the end asked, what happens as the technology improves? Well, the technology improving is a death sentence because it's called 5G. And they're going to find a way to get 5G up that tower. And when they get 5G up the tower, I don't know what any of our properties are going to be worth, because we're going to be spewing 5G radio contact so that everybody has a better cell phone. Everybody has a better cell. That's just what we need. We need another cell phone in our breast pocket so we have heart failure. We need another cell phone in our breast pocket so we get breast cancer. We need another cell phone in our pocket down here so we all get sterile. Okay? Which is happening. This is what's happening in this country. This is what's happening. And so the 5G is deadly. It's like taking an airplane. It goes over my house every morning because it comes from Cold Spring Harbor, I guess, and comes over my house every day, and it's driving. It's a seaplane, and it drives people, which I learned to fly on. It drives people to Wall Street. Okay. That plane can just as well stay here all day. We can hire them to spray Roundup all over us, because that's what's going to happen. The 5G acts the same way as Roundup does. It's absolutely deadly. It's deadly. Yes.
I'm going to have to cut you a little bit short.
Okay, I'll cut you short.
I really appreciate
All right,
all the information.
let me just
There's
wrap
so
up.
many other people that want to
Okay,
just add
let
something.
me wrap it up.
Please.
All right, so this is what's going to really happen to you if this is here. And somebody said, you know, where is heaven? I can't wait to see heaven. Well, you know what? You live in heaven. You live in Millneck, Lansing, Locust Valley, Center Island. This is heaven. This is heaven. You don't need to go anywhere else. You know, I'll be 80 October 23rd, and so I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be pounded up in a little cookie in a little jar and planted on my property, because that's heaven. Don't give up heaven for anybody, especially people.
I have one question.
You've waited very patiently.
Can I get your name, sir?
Joseph Vella.
B-E-L-L-A?
Yes.
Thank you.
The question is, we're talking about a 42-inch base for the pole. We didn't say the diameter of the antenna on top. You go around in the city or anywhere else, you see these antennas. They're about 4 feet tall, and they stick out from the pole for another 4 feet. And you're talking about putting 4 different sites up top of that thing? So we're looking at about a 10-foot radius.
Well, I think that
That little flag, but that little flag that he showed you is not showing how we're going to see
No,
it.
but I think that's what Mr. Kevin was referring to with the whips.
No, not the whips.
Yeah.
The whips are going to be on top of that.
Yeah.
This is just to hold their antennas up, not the fire department's antennas.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay?
Please. Okay.
So, I'm Ken Cron,
How do you spell the last name?
C-R-O-N, sorry.
Thank you.
And I guess I have a couple of thoughts. We didn't really know much about this until recently, and that might be our fault, but we really had not much communication. And now that we do, I guess what I would propose to the board is, I haven't heard from the applicant why this is emergent in that it has to be decided immediately. And I would offer that it seems like all the residents are concerned with the visual issues. We certainly are. And people have said, as you have, Chairman, that, you know, from your home or from the second floor, it might be a very different look. I don't know why we weren't informed as a village that this flag was being put up.
Yeah.
It seemed like if they were going to be,
Yeah.
you know, if they weren't being disingenuous, there could have been a notice that said, we're putting this flag up, why don't you, as a resident, go out to your window, look from your second floor, or look from your backyard and see in fact, if this is, visible. And it seems like that would have been a reasonable thing to do. Any other company would have done that, and I think the board, I'm sure, would want to be informed as much as they can be from the citizens as to what really takes place. And so since the applicant didn't give, at least in my mind, any emergent issue, and if you listen to the lawyer who just presented, it seems as though there's no significant coverage issue that any of us are experiencing. So why wouldn't we?
Ken, we're gonna comment on that.
Okay.
If I could, the reason why there's some urgency to move forward with this application before this board and also ultimately with the zoning board, where the ultimate decision will be made, is that under the FCC regulations, there is what they call a shot clock. And again, we're dealing with a federal law that is really favors, I'm being honest, it favors the telecommunications industry. So they have imposed what they call a shot clock. Our shot clock, the shot clock that applies to this application, originally expired on July 12th, so which means a decision would have to be made by July 12th, but it has been extended 3 weeks. The applicant has granted an extension, so now we're looking at August 2nd. So, I mean, that's all they've given us, so we need to get this process completed and get the referral back to the zoning board.
I understand. So then what my response to that would be, in fairness to the board, you're in a situation where in order to protect and represent the residents, right, as one of the responsibilities, I don't know that you have the proper information because none of us know what's visible and what's not visible. And I think in that way, I would say that, how could you give a favorable recommendation when you don't know?
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen Meister, 22 Beaver Brook Road. You actually do have the evidence because you have the letters from the residents saying that they will see the tower from their windows. And that is evidence at law that you're allowed and should and must consider. And it was up to, as this gentleman said, the applicant could have notified everyone and said, hey, go out and take pictures while the crane is there from your windows. So they didn't do it. And the residents have submitted letters. There's evidence of the impact and no evidence, no competent evidence of the non-impact. I have just a few quick questions. No one has addressed this, at least while I've been listening, and I was at the previous ZBA, the zoning board hearing as well. I don't know the exact height of the above sea level of the hill, but obviously, whatever that is, 100, 150 feet, then you have 125 to 150 foot tower on top of that. So it's maybe 300 feet above sea level, I'm speculating. Is that pole or tower going to be illuminated for air traffic at night?
As of now, I asked that question, and as of now, it is not.
Well, look, I'm a pilot. I don't think that's not going to be illuminated, okay? Because I think it's a massive hazard, okay? And I think it's going to end up being illuminated. And then, to say it's not visible is a joke, okay? Just to quickly move on with a couple other questions. I heard the applicant say, the name of the applicant, I believe, is Eastern Shores LLC. I'd like to understand, I don't understand, what that is. It's not Millneck Manor as far as I know. Who owns it and what the connection is between Millneck Manor and that applicant? Is that applicant a lessee or a putative lessee of the site from Millneck Manor? And who owns that entity? And I'll just continue. My last question, I don't remember the names of the two.
The Eastern Shore Towers is a business entity of Verizon.
Okay.
No.
It's a separate
That's what the application is.
Who owns Eastern Shore Towers LLC is my question. Who specifically owns that entity?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. So, Eastern Shore Towers is a separate entity apart from Verizon Wireless. The reference to doing business as Verizon Wireless is the New York SMA.
Who owns it?
Well, we have a representative here, Victoria Brennan.
Who owns it? Not who represents it?
Victoria Brennan.
Victoria Brennan owns
Sorry,
it?
but what is Eastern Shore Towers' responsibility in this application?
They are constructing the tower.
That's all we have to say.
And they're a lessee.
Thank you, that's all.
Yes.
But does Ms. Grace own the LLC?
And then they
She
lease
is
to
a principal.
Verizon and others.
Yes, please, go ahead.
I'm Frank
Ciata, I'm the real estate appraiser. I live
Yeah.
at 26 Frost Mill Road, and as a concerned resident, I took the opportunity to read the Lynch appraisal. And my major concern with the Lynch appraisal is that the data that he analyzed is over 20 years old. It is not relevant to today's market. It was misleading and unreliable. And to suggest that I'm biased, if the facts were different, then maybe you could construe that I was biased. But factually, the data is irrelevant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, you have one more question?
Thank you. I just, look, I heard the applicant state that the appraisal put in by, I think it's Mr. Campione?
Campanelli.
Sorry, Campanelli, pardon me, was biased. But I think, honestly, the board should inquire, as long as bias is raised, as to whether the appraiser put on by the applicant was paid to do that, and how much he was paid. Because if we're talking about bias, he was paid to produce a report to achieve a certain result.
I think Mrs. Ciata already raised
Fair
that
enough. Thank you.
question. Please.
Yes.
Right behind you, bro.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So far, I've heard you speak about the vision.
I'm sorry, I
I'm
have-
sorry, Judith Heimovic, I'm at 1 La Colleen Drive.
And just spell your last name.
Haimovic.
Thank you.
So far, I've heard a lot of discussion about the visual impact. What about the health impact?
Yes.
You're the only person who've alluded to that.
Yeah.
You know, it's sad if it visually hurts us, but what about the potential radio frequency waves, which most of us do not understand the impact of, being centered in our community and with, great intensity? Yes.
Thank you.
And also the impact on value because of this
Can I answer?
uncertainty.
Right, impact on value, and all of us are
The bee-
concerned with value, but I think first and foremost, all of us are concerned with our health.
The bees will leave their nest. The bees will leave their nest, they'll circulate around, they'll get pollen,
Wait to be
and
recognized.
they will not find their way back to the nest.
Please, go
That's
ahead.
the bees, just the
Thank you.
bees. And the people are a whole different thing. The people will be affected. 4G has done its work, but
Okay.
5G is accumulation
Okay,
of...
sir.
Sorry, you had a question? I'm sorry.
So my name is Arash Yaragi. I live at 100 Horseshoe.
Just
Very-
spell A-R-A-G.
Arash.
Thank you.
And my house is on top of a hill, and I have balconies outside my second floor where I come in every morning now in the summer to have coffee, read a book, and I look over top of the trees directly at Mill Lake Manor. And if I took a picture of my view, if they put a tower that would stick up 50 feet above the tree line over there, that will totally ruin my view. And in terms of reception, I want to add that when we moved here, we had trouble with reception on the, and I'm all for the phone technology. I have phones and I use computers in my house. But with the use of Wi-Fi today, reception is everywhere.
Exactly.
I could go, I have a basement that goes down 2 floors. I could go all the way down to my basement and I have phone reception through Wi-Fi. So, and the comparison in the study that we looked at, that they presented, the comparison of homes and towers in Woodbury or Jericho compared to Mill Neck is not fair. we all moved here because of Milneck, because of what Milneck is. And Milneck is all about beauty and the tree lines.
My name is Arlene Rickner, and I'm rival committee. I have two questions. First of all, I'd like to ask how many people in this audience are concerned enough about their cell phone reception that they're interested in doing this?
No one.
Next.
Next, I'd like to know, somebody earlier asked, what is the benefit? And that question was never answered. And also, I would like to know who is profiting from this going in. Thank you. Excellent.
Well, they're on the record. I don't have that answer, but they're on the record and it will be addressed.
How will it be addressed?
And when it goes to the board, the next board, the zoning board of appeals, we have to address those questions for you. We're not in a position to do that.
What is that?
What is that?
Yeah, somebody else have a question? Yeah.
How hard is it to get the crane back?
Can I just get your name?
Scott Willard, I'm at 52 Frost Mill. We share a property line.
I can't imagine it's very much.
I mean, it seems like you pick up the phone, you get a crane, right? And then we can take pictures from everywhere.
It's a shop block basically, FCC, that's covered. If we had the luxury of time, then we tell them to reinstall it, but.
The crane is not an accurate depiction. It's just not. You go look at all these cell towers, it doesn't look like that crane is in that picture. Which has just, it's not even solid. It doesn't have things hanging off it.
Unfortunately, I think that's the only avenue we have that will give you some sort of representation of a tower. You can't get up 150 feet with a pole.
The big question is, how do we stop this? We are here to stop it.
Nobody, how do we do that? What can we do to stop this? We feel like these people came in here into a sparsely little village and they feel like they're gonna make some money on us, right? And we don't want it. We don't want anything to do with it. Our cell phones work fine, everything is fine here, leave us alone, go find someplace else that you can give cell service to everybody else around the Long North Shore. I think everything that we've heard from them is deceptive. This is my own feeling. I'm not speaking for everybody else. And
Yeah, I think
yes.
you are.
And it's not speaking for all of us. It's not about home value. If you told us that our home values were going to go up, we'd still say no.
Exactly. That's right.
This is about keeping Milneck the way it is. So my question is, the planning board is not the board that's going to make the decision. Is it the zoning board?
Correct.
And when is that? Yes.
When do they meet next?
Are we going to get an opportunity to meet with them, and as we did not the first time?
That will be a public hearing as well, and the community will get it.
When will that be?
We didn't know.
Will
Who's
that be?
taking the people and assigning the 3-week limit?
We can't have, one at a time. Go ahead.
You said that in order to get the information, we have to go to the zoning board, and you don't know when that meeting is. And my question is, we were told about the shot clock, and we have roughly 3 more weeks. First question is, what happens if you don't come up, you or the zoning board doesn't come up with an answer within the 3 weeks? What fine is there?
Well, we're gonna have our answer tonight, okay? And then it's gonna be referred to the zoning board. When that meeting is, I don't know. I don't think it's been scheduled
It's not
yet.
been scheduled yet.
As soon as it's scheduled, everybody in the room, including this board, will be notified and able to attend prior to that shot clock expiring.
How are we going to be notified? Just posted it?
Typically, it's posted in the Locust Valley Leader and on the podium out here by the Village Hall.
They've got our email addresses. It'd be nice to get notified.
My name's Tom Murray. I live at 220 West Road. One of the major problems that concern me here, and my family has been in this village for 60 some odd years, there's a governance issue here. And I'm addressing the planning board. This has been going on, this whole application has been going on for 3.5 to 4 years. What? And we've been processing this like it's a variance or it's an application, period. Why weren't we ever notified? This has just come upon us, and all of a sudden we're talking about a shot clock.
Yeah.
The zoning board meeting was called on May 18th. 8 to 10 days before that, all the zoning board members get a data dump of paper, about 200 papers, to say read and be briefed for it for the zoning board. You work for us. We're a community here. Where's the outreach? It stems from the top and comes down. There are people who are indifferent in this community, think a cell tower is good, and that we have no say. It's shameful.
Amen. This board is going to assess all the information, and you will have our decision.
Robert DeGraff, when he was our mayor, fought off the bridge. He was an underdog dealing with Moses and Rockefeller. That was a behind the doors deal. If he had just rolled over like we are, that bridge would have been here and we wouldn't have a village. This shot clock should be extended. What about our shot clock? We were notified, what, a couple of weeks ago?
Listen,
And it's not an abutter issue.
I think we got the sentiment of all the residents, and we get it. We're going to open up the vote now. Everybody else? I'm sorry. If it's brief. If it's a brief. Yeah. Absolutely. No, please.
My name is Bill Catacasinas, and I live on Cleft Road. Tom is one of my neighbors. When my wife and I first came here to Mill Neck in 1978 and saw this village, we were stunned. The beauty just shook us. And there was a time when someone wanted to break up this property that we own, 57 acres. And we said, no, we'll buy the whole piece. There is no other place on Long Island, I submit, that can match the beauty, the ambiance of this place. Why are we sitting here debating whether or not we should agree to this application? Let me finish. There's a reality here. You know why they want this tower? Because copper is going away, fiber optics is going away, and what we're going to find is Wi-Fi antennas on every single utility pole around. My son lives in the village of Brookville. The mayor of the village has been trying to get Verizon to provide service. They refuse to do it. They refuse to do it. He asked me to help. It took me two months to figure out why they cannot have service, because everything is going Wi-Fi. There is no benefit to this village to have a tower sticking up out of the ground that we all can see. I've invited this board to come to my property and look at what the effect would be. I have over 1,000 feet of fence that borders on the school. I support the school. I think they do marvelous things. But there is no benefit to this village to have this tower. Because if it's approved, you and I and this whole goddamn board in this village are going to end up leaving a legacy for those who follow us. We're going to look at this tower and say, what were they thinking?
Hi, good evening. I'm Sarah Coutts. I'm from KAUTZ. I am the Preservation Director at Preservation Long Island, and we submitted a letter of comment regarding this to the Planning Board and also to the ZBA. I just wanted to, because nobody's mentioned it, this property that we're on, where the site is being proposed, is on the National Register. It's been on the National Register since 1979. And the way I read the EAF form, the Environmental Assessment Form, the letter from the New York State Historic Preservation Office dated October 2019, I'm not a lawyer, you know, maybe the gentleman can, but I do know SECRA, the State Environmental Quality Review Act process, and my understanding is the FCC permit, which this letter that was the scope and content of that letter. And they were even very careful to say that's what we're talking about. But for you all and for any village, it's a State Environmental Quality Review Act, and your code, as the gentleman was saying, there's provisions in the code about where to put a tower like this and where is inappropriate, which is amazing that the village has this code. But I just wanted to say this is a historic resource of the village. And it is adjacent to not only other properties that are historically important, but publicly owned properties. And Planning Fields is right next door. That's also on the National Register. It's a state park. There's a town park, the Teddy Roosevelt Park. The Shoe Reserve is the North Shore Land Alliance Reserve. These are all incredibly significant historic properties, open spaces, natural spaces. And I just think the materials that the applicant has provided has, in our opinion, in Preservation Long Island's opinion, and we've been doing this on Long Island since 1948, it doesn't address in any kind of substantive way the impact on the historic resources, not just around, and I think we've heard from everybody in the community what the impact would be, but also here in this amazing place that was an old estate designed by world-renowned architects, including a landscape architect. Levitt is his name. There's nothing in the application about the impact on the landscape architecture, and that would include the lawns, the driveways, the view sheds, the lines of sight. It's not just the buildings. And the scope of that letter from the New York State Historic Preservation Office talks only about the buildings and only about the FCC permit. It's not thinking about these other aspects. And indeed, the SHPO said, if this goes forward, we're going to have to do SECRA, an environmental review. And under SECRA, a lot of people are kind of surprised to learn, it's not just natural resources, it's also historic, aesthetic, architectural, anything in our environment. So it's a big umbrella for the state environmental quality review process, and it's different and separate is my understanding. Perhaps I'm wrong, but I think this shot clock thing is something else, and this stuff is related to the SECRA process to you all. I'm not sure, but I feel that the letter from SHPO has been misrepresented in this application. I'm not a lawyer, I don't know. The separation from that process and this one is a little unclear to us, but it does seem like there's a lot of questions about the historic resources, and so much is at stake because it would really change the whole character. Thank you very much.
I think at this time we've gotten the overall. Oh, I'm sorry. Last one, please.
My name is Perry Jones, and I've been a homeowner in Mill Neck for 48 years, and we have an unobstructed view across Beaver Lake toward Mill Neck Manor, and we would definitely see the antenna. But I want to make the point, this is strictly a commercial operation where people are making money, and the people who are going to absorb the liability are all the homeowners here. There is nothing but downside for us in emotional and financial damages. And so we're being asked, so other people can make money, that we wind up having the liability.
From what Mr. Catacasino said and what I've read this weekend, 5G does not use towers. So it sounds to me a little bit like trying to sell Henry Ford a buggy whip. It's going to be obsolete. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a techie. But if it's going to be obsolete.
But I think everybody on this board, and I think at this point, are we ready to cast a vote?
Deliberate a little bit. Any comments?
Any additional comments from the board? John? No. Okay. All right. I'll open the voting. Well, the applicants made certain points and certain aspects of your presentation do comply with our conditions, or some of our conditions. There are a lot of concerns that I personally have, and I can't speak for my board members, but visibility, noise, property value, the beauty of the terrain of Mill Neck. For all of those reasons, I can't say that you've met the conditions to make a positive recommendation. So I have to oppose the third vote.
Voting no, not recommended, move to.
I'm opposed.
Based on the unanimous decision of the board, we will make the recommendation to deny this application.